We are your hosts, Rachel,
Jenny,
and Sophia.
And we are so excited to be speaking to our guest today. But before we do, we would just like to say thank you to everyone who has viewed our podcast. We are glad that people are able to see guest speakers share their thoughts, opinions, and experiences with racism, and all have the same goal of ending it.
As many of you know, racism has been a big issue all around the world. Furthermore, anxiety and fear about the ongoing pandemic have been widespread. Asian-focused racist incidents and Black Lives Matter protests have constantly been happening throughout the year.
Our guest today is Martin Owusu. He's a banking and finance lawyer in Toronto and vice president as well as board of directors of Koopa Foundation. Hi, how are you? How has your day been so far?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Sophia. And I got to give you props because you pronounced my last name right.
Oh, really?
Okay, you did, yeah. Most people don't get it on the first try. So, but yeah, I'm doing good. It's I'm based in Toronto right now, and we've had a string of nice days. So, I'm a big. The weather really impacts my mood. So,
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy right now.
Okay, great. So I'm going to get straight into the questions if that's okay for you. So so many people are coming together to support Black Lives Matter. How does that make you feel?
I think it's great. I think it's really encouraging to see, not only, young Black people take up the mantle and take action for social change. And it's also, encouraging to see, that anti-Asian racism that you see. I think that's popping up a bit more over the last couple months. But in addition to seeing, Black people with Black Lives Matter and, young Asian folks with, pushing forward anti-Asian racism, it's good to see, people of other races supporting. And I think that's what largely has changed in the last year. You see a lot of support, not just from people within that community, but allies outside of that. So it's exciting. I guess the one thing I'll add is the whole movement is really, media driven. And I think by dint of that, the focus is on awareness, which is really important. I think awareness is the first step. But I think too often that's as far as it goes. The hard work is involved after that, right? Once you get people aware, is it just about, posting something on social media or,
taking action?
Exactly. Yeah. What do you do after you become aware? So I think that's what, I really want to see moving forward, whether that's, being engaged politically, whether it's voting, tweeting and, protesting, all that's really important, but I think it's just a first step. So, I'd like to see more advocacy and action, which I think is happening, but I think that's just as important as the awareness piece.
Okay, great. So I would like to ask if you've ever experienced racism before?
Yeah, I have, unfortunately. Do you want me to talk about those experiences or?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah, so it's contextually dependent. I think, if I'm with a group of, 2, 3, 4 of my Black friends, you're a lot more likely to be overtly challenged or addressed because of race. Whereas, if I'm at work, it's a lot less likely that someone will be overtly racist to me. If I do struggle with race at work, it's oftentimes a lot more subtle.
Right.
And it's oftentimes it's not ill-intentioned. I think, you know, at least my experience in the workplace, most people want to be helpful, and most people want to do the right thing. I think oftentimes people, you know, lack, you know, the perspective of what it is to be a racialized person. And I think because of that, sometimes certain things that people say, you know, could be perceived as a bit insensitive. So, you know, that's one aspect of it. But, you know, my experience so far as a lawyer has been pretty great, to be honest. I can't speak for every, you know, other Black person because everyone's experiences are different. And, you know, maybe I'm just not as perceptive as well. Like maybe I don't notice when people are being racist or say things that, you know, have an undertone, but my experience has generally been good. I'd say the most pernicious form of racism would be the structural kind, right? So, for example, you know, I work in a law firm. Majority of the folks there are, you know, are white folks, and because of that, certain structural consequences occur, right? So if you walk into a meeting and you're the only Black person, you know, people might not be being overtly racist, but because, you know, Black people haven't necessarily been given the opportunity, whether that begins, you know, in high school or middle school or at the law school stage, they haven't been given the same opportunities to, you know, be in professions like law. And so if you're a Black person in those spaces, there's a good chance you might be one of the only ones. And that's just something that you have to kind of battle and deal with that others don't. So yeah, I'd say as I've gotten older, the overt form of racism has definitely decreased, but it doesn't mean, you know, you don't face challenges as a Black person.
Right.
Right, I understand. So, what do you think the term anti-racist means, and how does it differ from being not racist?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people think they're not racist. When I hear anti-racist, I think of someone who's actually an ally and doing things to diminish the instances of racism in their community. So I see one more as an active participant, and the other as, you know, just someone who doesn't think they're racist or who's happy, you know, having their own beliefs which they, you know, view as not racist, but isn't actually doing anything to reduce the incidences of racism out in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you guys think? I feel like I'm talking too much. I want to hear what you guys think.
Well, I think like to be anti-racist, like you said, you have to take action and do something to spread more awareness rather than just saying you're not racist. Because I feel like everyone's sort of a bit racist in some way without like, you know, like you're unintentionally racist. But
Yeah.
like if you want to, you know, make some change, then you should start doing that.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
me,
that's interesting. Like recognizing that all of us hold some sort of bias. And the first person to say like, hey, I'm not a racist. It's like, well, maybe you don't think you are, but I'm sure like all of us, you have beliefs that need to be checked from time to time. So it's a great point.
Okay, well, you kind of just touched on this earlier, but what has it been like for you to practice law as a Black lawyer in Toronto?
Yeah, I talked about this a bit already. I think you know, part of it is, like I said, being the only one, oftentimes, and that comes with its own challenges. I think there's also some cultural differences, which, you know, isn't necessarily about color. You know, my family is from West Africa. You know, I've been raised a certain way, mostly according to West African traditions. And the culture of law firms, because it's been dominated by white folks for so long, tends to be more of a Caucasian culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some senses, it makes it a little bit more difficult for someone like me to just integrate as easily. But, one thing I have found is when you try and engage people at an individual level, which is what I've done with, a lot of the white lawyers at my firm, person to person, the humanity tends to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if someone just sees you as your color or as your race, it's a lot easier for them to sort of project their biases and expectations onto you. And vice versa, right? Like someone like me, entering a law firm and I see, older white dude,
Right.
My first assumption might be, oh, maybe he's not the most culturally competent, he's from a different era, or he or she's from a different era. Maybe they harbor some racist views.
Mm.
But I find the more you get to know people on a personal one-on-one level, a lot of that breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've been able to develop really strong relationships with lawyers in my firm, regardless of their color, because once people get to know you, a lot of that other stuff tends to not matter, at least in my experience. So, my experience has been great. Like I said, there's people who have different experiences, right?
Right.
I'm sure if you talk to, a Black woman at my firm, they might have a different perspective. So yeah, I mean, I guess it goes back to the idea there's not one single Black experience.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's is different. And I'm sure you guys would say the same. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like you're very fortunate that you never really had that experience, because with like the other guest speakers, they've spoken about like it was like a Black woman, she experienced racism. So I think like gender has some sort of like effect with it too as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, big time. Big time. I think, even in popular culture, the way Black men are treated versus Black women, there's a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that affects how people see you. So totally.
Mm-hmm. How do you think that systemic racism affected the law industry?
Well, I mean, I think in a number of ways, like the first being the lack of Black lawyers in the industry. If you think about, these are the people that are shaping the law, whether it be lawyers, judges, and you don't have Black people at the table, the chances that the law as it's formed will address matters that are important to Black people goes way down, right? So I think that's probably the biggest thing. Law has such a pervasive impact in all of our lives, and if it's shaped by only one group, the law is going to be biased, which, it's shown to be.
All right. Now, would you like to talk about Koopa Foundation and maybe just first introduce it to those who don't know?
Yeah. So the Kuppa Foundation is Vancouver-based nonprofit, and essentially we provide services to marginalized youth in the Lower Mainland that helps to bridge the opportunity gap. Now, what do I mean by opportunity gap? If you are born into certain conditions, there are certain things that are available to you, right? Whether that's, your parents' professional network, whether that's wealth, which translates into, certain extracurricular activities, the ability to afford tutors, college prep. There's all sorts of things that youth from marginalized communities don't necessarily have access to just because of their racial, socioeconomic, or whatever marginalizing factor. And so, the result of that is our education system isn't necessarily equal, right? Like certain students have a better shot at achieving whatever their self-determined goals are,
Right.
compared to others. So what Koopa Foundation is trying to do is to bridge that gap. So we're looking at kids in our community who are marginalized for whatever reason, whether it be race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and we're providing those services that allow them to achieve goals that they define themselves. So we're really trying to put the power back in our community's hands, you know, the Black community, the LGBT community, and empower those youth to come up and better their own communities. I think a lot of times the solutions come from the outside, and there's definitely a place for that, and it's important, but it's kind of like the teach a man to fish metaphor, right? Or parable. If you empower people within the community to become leaders, if you give them the skills to be successful, that not only raises them, but it raises the community, because there's a good chance they go back once they've arrived at where they, exactly, Sophia. So, you know, you look at the directors and the executives of Koopa, for the most part, we're all Black professionals, Black people who have, you know, achieved some level of success. It feels weird to say, but I mean, at least we've gotten there, right? Like, you know, I've passed the bar, I can practice law. You know, Eric is the president, he's an entrepreneur, he started a business.
Oh, wow.
The reason we're doing this is because we care about our community, and we think because of the position we're in now, we can turn around and help. And that's exactly the same cycle we're trying to foster with the youth coming through our program.
Yeah, I definitely think that's like amazing, because for one of my debate topics, I had like this 3-month prep on just focusing on the West African access to like healthcare, for example, because like you said, like the marginalized children, they don't have like same access compared to like the wealthiest, you know, not trying to like divide, but like these like hierarchy, I guess. And I learned that they don't have like same access, like opportunities to like healthcare, education, and all that. So I think what you're doing is like really amazing. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Sophia. I mean, you're absolutely right. And what that lack of access does is it perpetuates, you know, the existing state of affairs, right? If you come from a poor family and you don't have the means to pull yourself out, and it's more likely your kids won't either. And it creates a cycle, right? So, you know, Koopa is trying to break that cycle. We just launched a pilot project for the year. So we haven't launched the program in full. We're taking in about 6 to 12 students. And, you know, right now it's not a lot, but, you know, I'm a big believer in if you can make a change, you know, in your small corner of the world, it matters, right? Koopa, you know, we don't know if it's going to become a national or international organization, but as long as we're helping 1, 2 people in our community, you know, to us, that's the world. I think the impact is so important.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. That's also why Rachel and I started this organization. Like, although it may not be like internationally impactful, like we're still making like a small change that it impacts our community. And we did manage to get a lot of fundraisers done so that we can like donate to other charities that are supporting anti-racism. And I think like, even if it's not something big, if you do small within your community, like what you're given, I think that's really important in like making a change, like a positive change in the community. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to help one person, right? If you can change one life, I think it's worth it, right? Yeah. And by the way, I think what you guys are doing is so cool. When I was in high school, I was not doing anything like this. And so like to see people your age starting a nonprofit, you know, reaching out to people, starting a podcast, like it's amazing. Like I'm so impressed by you guys. Yeah, I just want you to know that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So how important is it to you to keep these discussions about racism?
Yeah, I think it's really important. If you don't keep talking about it,
Mhm.
it's really easy to revert back to the status quo.
Yeah.
And I think continuing to have these conversations makes people more comfortable in having them.
Mm.
Because, I mean, let's face it, like these aren't easy conversations to have, right? You don't just walk up to a stranger and say, what's the difference between not being a racist and being anti-racist, right? It's just, these are difficult conversations. And so you need a push to get people to have them. So I think it's important. I think it's hugely important.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. So how has like your foundation like helped students find their goals and like move themselves forward successfully? Could you like briefly touch upon that?
Yeah. So we're just launching our pilot, which means we haven't had any students come through the program yet, but I can talk about like what we plan to do, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So our pilot is really divided into 4 phases of leadership development,
Mm.
and really the whole goal is to get the students who come through to think about their long-term goals
Mm.
as well as their place in the community.
Right.
Because I think if you're going to develop leaders, to become a leader, that has to come from within,
Yeah.
and you can only propel yourself forward if you have a target, if you have something to aim at. So what we've done with the youth is we're trying to get them to think, okay, what's your 3 to 5 year plan?
Mm.
What are the areas of your life that are meaningful to you?
Mm.
And in 3 to 5 years, where do you want to see yourself in those, whether it's academic,
That's
you
cool.
know, yeah, whether it's academic, friends, social circle, family,
Mm.
and just get them thinking about their goals and writing them down.
Mm.
Once we do that, we teach our students habit formation. So it's one thing to have a goal.
Mm.
You have to know what habits are necessary to achieve those goals. So that's sort of how the program works. It built throughout the year. It builds on different skill sets,
Mhm.
and students work on these projects to help them, like I said, think about themselves and their place in the community long term.
Mhm.
Each of the students is provided with a mentor who's already a leader in the community
Mhm.
to kind of help guide them towards achieving their goal.
Mhm.
And, like I said, students are also offered tutors. So, for us, graduating from high school
Mm.
for a lot of positions of leadership is kind of a bare minimum. And so if students come to the program struggling to pass on to the next grade or to graduate,
Mm.
we want to give them the tools to reach that milestone. So that's why we offer tutoring as well.
Wow. I think that's
Um,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
So lastly, what message or like final words do you have for our audience that are going to be watching this podcast episode?
I guess I would say don't be discouraged.
Mm.
If you're trying to do anything that's difficult, I think you're going to run into challenges and setbacks.
Right.
Change takes time, and you shouldn't get discouraged if you don't see it happening as fast as you'd like or as fast as you feel like it should be happening. You need to be persistent and stick with it. That said, I don't think it means you should be complacent, right? I think you should do everything you can to move the needle forward.
Mhm.
But as I said, if things aren't progressing as fast as you'd like, don't be discouraged. You have to keep going, because if we don't continue having these conversations, like you said, if you don't keep doing the work and raising awareness like you and I is doing,
Yeah.
it's just nothing's going to change, right?
Mhm.
So just keep going. And I guess the second piece of advice I would say is be compassionate towards the people you're trying to persuade. So if you come across someone who quote unquote appears to be an enemy of your cause, or doesn't necessarily align with your view of the world, I think it does more harm to shun those people than to engage them and treating them as valuable ends in themselves, than calling out people and shaming people. I don't think that approach works. And I think most people want to see themselves as good. And I think as people trying to make social change, have to allow those people to participate in the community of moving things forward. And if you label them or if you shame them, it makes it harder for them to do that. And the truth is, if we're going to overcome racism, we need, everybody on our side, right? Like, we need white folks on our side.
Yeah.
We need people who don't think racism exists, because if you just say, I'm not engaging with you, you're not worth it, and you move on, those people are still there, and those views remain. And you can shame them and you can, push them away, but eventually that resentment is going to show up in another way. So I would just say love and grace in everything you do. Advocate vigorously, fight fiercely, but when you come across people who are opposed to you, show them love. Yeah.
So we would like to say thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. We have had such a great time just talking about like racism and how you view the world, and as well as your foundation and your experiences, as well as like how we can make a change to the world.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if any of you want to get involved with the Koopa Foundation, feel free to shoot me an email at Martin, Martin, at Koopa, Kupaa foundation.org, or check out our website in koopafoundation.org.
We will link it.
Thank you. I was afraid I was gonna have to plug it all by myself, so I appreciate that.
We'll like put it below.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to everyone who has tuned in to the end. Stay tuned for next week's podcast episode.
As always, let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Go.